All right, here we are, week 5. Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. So here we go. Week 5, basically, it's another peer review type of week. So the assignment that you wrote last week, the introduction paragraph, body paragraph, and conclusion paragraph, you're peer reviewing those, and working on sort of improving those, since we're sort of then going to move towards a full draft next week. So I wanted to just go over a couple of things about peer review and then other things just about the writing. Um, so in peer review, right, if you can point things out to people, right, help them improve their essay by saying maybe this should be more developed or whatever, you're also helping yourself just because you're sort of repeating um, the necessary components for your own essay in a way. All right, so let me do this peer review. So this is my basic ideas or rules, I guess, whatever, for the peer review sheet, right? So you're trying to write more complete responses. So if you can, you go out of your way to make yourself say stuff, essentially, right? Instead of like, this is pretty good, nice job. You want to try to give them something that they can use, right? So even if it is good, you could point out specifically what's good, or you could think of a way that they might be able to even enhance it even more, right? Strengthen it. So a complete response, you want to write a few sentences. I know there's a minimum sentence count, like, I don't know, 2 sentences or so on. So I always say you want to do more than that. The other thing is, for each of the sections, you want to, if you can, you want to try to strive to make uh, a single comment about how they could improve. Okay, so there we go. Respond in full sentences, 2 full sentences, right? So I just recommend doing more. And then for like each of these sections, if you can make sure that you give at least one suggestion for improvement, that would be great. You can give more too. You don't want to give 50, but at least one suggestion for each section would be helpful for the person. So I try to get people to strive for that. Another thing I want in somewhere in the peer review, you don't have to do this for every section, but somewhere you want to at least once quote from the actual essay that you're reviewing. Okay, so again, this is just helping to clarify. So if you're talking about how they could improve something, why don't you just quote from their essay? Here's the part, you give it to them, and then you can say after it, you can develop this more, or you can add more to this, or this isn't quite clear, or whatever you want. But try to quote at least once. The more you quote, the better. Like, so if you could use a quote, from their essay in each section to help you make a point or give an improvement, do that. But so then I give some examples, right? Like ways to quote from, the one way to do it is to quote in order to help explain your suggestions, right? So that's the idea, that you quote something and then you say, I think this could be clearer or stronger if you do X, Y, Z, right? Another way to quote is to quote something that they wrote and then try to help them clarify that, right? Like you could be like, so you wrote this, but it's not very clear to me what that exactly means, or and then ask them, are you saying this? Are you saying X? Are you saying Y? So those are 2 ways. So my example one is this, if I was responding and I said, like, so you write that your main stance is, quote, social media has both helped and harmed people since the beginning. You might want to pick one side or the other to make your argument stronger. You might also want to be more specific about what groups of people you'll be dealing with: young children, teens, older adults, etc. So that's an example of using quotes, right, in your peer review. All right, so the rubric. So this is so again, thinking about when you're going over people's you're peer reviewing people's assignment, also when you start to think about yours and working on yours. So this is the rubric for each part of the assignment, right? So the introduction paragraph with the thesis statement. And so it tries to break it down into points. All right, so here's one thing I wanted to go over real quick. And this is the rubric, right, for the assignment. It's this idea that it's looking for you to do what's calling like shift to source material, which is really, right, just it's like transitioning, like how to integrate your quotes into an essay. So when you're looking at the peer review, you're trying to make sure people are doing this, and when you're looking at your own, you're also trying to do this. So what it is a way of making sure that if you have a quote to use, you need to do all of these steps in order for your quote to be integrated into your essay. And this the rubric just uses different language, but that's essentially what that means. Shift to source material, present source material, shift back to student's voice. So the first one is you set up. So you need a sentence that sets up the quote, meaning like you're sort of introducing the actual subject or like main keyword or whatever you want to signal that the quote's going to be dealing with, right? So, and I'm using this from the Oberg, from the culture shock thing. So I've mentioned this idea about cues and culture shock there, right? So I'm saying, making a statement because I know I'm going to get ready to use the quote that's coming up. Anyway, so that's the first part. Um, the second part is about introducing the quote. This has to do with using, making sure that the quote is connected to your own language. Okay. So you need to actually, like, according to blah, 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 and then you can start the quote. Or Smith writes, and then you can put the quote. But you need something there. So this is what I have with my, he implies that these cues are almost subconscious when he writes, comma. So there I even give a little bit more information and like explain something. And then when he writes, comma, and then I present the actual quote. Right, so there's the quote. But you never want to just have your quote there by itself. Right, like meaning like you started at the beginning and that's it. Right. You don't want that. You want to make sure you have something before it so that you can um, correctly introduce it. Again, this is all to make the reading easier for people. Right? Then you need to follow up the quote. So this means you are basically writing an entire sentence that explains the meaning of the quote. Right? So it's almost like the whole process is I'm going to talk about this subject, or I'm going to I'm going to talk about this subject. Uh, I have a person who's going to say something about it. Here's what they say about it, and then here's what that means. Here's what they said. Right. So it's this process of integrating it, and again, in the rubric, it's talking about shifting back to the student's voice. That's what you do with number 4 when you follow up with a sentence that explains it. It's your voice explaining the meaning of the quote, and now we're back in with your voice. Okay, so one other thing I wanted to go over. So again, this is from the rubric, and it's something you want to look at when you're doing your peer reviews, and then when you're working on your own. You're going to see in the peer review in places it'll talk about. I mean, in the rubric in places it'll talk about using multiple argument techniques, right? That the student needs to use more argument techniques. So it's showing that you can make an argument using different techniques. So what I wanted to try to do was go over or just look at or let you know that it exists as these argument techniques, what that means, basically. Um, these are all things people do in an argument essay to make an argument. Okay, so you can have a general idea and you draw a very specific conclusion, right? That's deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is you have a specific example and you draw a conclusion from that. Analogy, you're making a comparison. Causal reasoning is going out of your way to really explain and focus on the cause and effect issue. So what I'm saying is in your essay, you're going to have a main argument and then you're going to have three supporting arguments. So each of the supporting arguments, you have to make the case for each of them. And one of the things to do is to identify which of these you can use and then make yourself use them. What I mean is, if you sort of know what you're doing, then you'll be able to do it better. So if I decide that, okay, I'm using this quote from this expert, so in this part of the paragraph or this paragraph, I'm going to be appealing to the authority of this person. So what I need to do for that, to pull that off, is I need to make sure the reader knows that this person is an expert and that they know everything and that we can all believe them no matter what and so on. And then I can give the quote and then that will help me make my point. Right? Fact-based, same thing. I mean, this one's, we're more used to this. We'll use, like, people pretty, regularly want to use statistics or data or whatever. But what I'm saying is you want to be able to sort of call to your mind what it is you're using, and then everything that you write, because you've already sort of thought about the type that you're using, your writing will reflect that, right? So if I'm like, all right, I'm going to use statistics here to help prove this thing. So if I know that's what I'm doing, then when I write, my focus will be on the statistics. It'll be on explaining the connection between statistics and whatever my argument is. Example, same thing. So if I'm going to focus on a specific example, take like Snapchat, if I happen to be talking about social media, and I'm going to do a thing about that, just recognizing that to myself, like, okay, this is where I talk about how Snapchat does these various things and has these various effects on people, right? So just knowing that helps me write it better. The other one you might see, and you're going to see this a little bit in the rubric also, is like when they want you to do, they call it opposing views, like developing, they might call it developing opposing views. All that really means is that you bring up opposing views, but then you need to shoot them down, right? You're not here to, write both sides. So there's some good points and some bad points. You're here to make a case for one side or the other. So, and counter argument is one of the techniques that you can use. It means you bring up some point that your opposition has, and then you demonstrate why that is wrong. Right? So, example, some people argue that the death penalty deters crime. However, studies have shown that there's no significant difference in crime rates between states with and without the death penalty. So what you're doing is you're strengthening your own argument by just pointing out the other side. First, you're pointing out like you're aware of the other side's argument. You've taken it into consideration, and this is why they're wrong. So this technique is something I would hope everybody tries to use at least once, because in the rubric, that's one of the things when it talks about let me not be able to find it now, probably, but or this is here we go. Development of supporting and opposing arguments, right? That does not mean you need to explain opposing arguments, right? You develop your supporting arguments, and then you need to bring up opposing arguments and explain why they're wrong. That's the point behind that.